Anyways, welcome everybody. Great to be here, and great to see everybody looking so well. I'm sure it's great to be anywhere after 50 years in Keoltown. Now, 50 years ago, there wasn't a car in Keoltown. And I remember the father saying, you'd be lucky if you had a bad bike. Never mind a car. Now, the only man that I remember that had a brand new bike was John Garvin Sr., the Lord of mercy on him. And nearly everyone else was going around in those days what we used to describe as a bone shaker. And we used to have to bring them up to Sean Corcoran to have them welded. And I remember going up there one time to Sean and saying to him, I said, Sean, you need to use a new welding rod on this one because it's very badly broken. Yeah, says Sean, and you need a bike. You're coming up here so often. He said to me, all the welding rods in the country, he said, wouldn't fix the sprat that you're bringing up here. But I do remember the first time that Michael Garvin got his first car. Oh, and by the way, before I speak, I need to say something. It is Michael Garvin's birthday here tonight. So I'd like to wish Michael Garvin a very happy birthday. Now, Michael said to me that in no circumstances was I to mention his age. However, I can tell you, he is a 21-year-old with well over 40 years experience. Isn't that right, Maura? Now, I remember the first time that Michael got his first car. And in those days, his dad always used to cycle to Mass. And for the first Sunday or so, he didn't travel with Michael in a new car. Now, that's no reflection of Michael's driving. But somebody met John along the road and said to him, John, would you cycle with Michael in his fine new car? And John said, we need to have one survivor anyway. But we were very lucky back then. We didn't have too far to cycle because right beside us was Keoltown House. Now, we never called it Keoltown House. We simply called it the Big House because, well, it was slightly bigger than our house. And nearly every Sunday, we used to go up to Keoltown House. Many kids went up to Keoltown House, and there were, at that time, it was unoccupied until John Scott came, because John Scott had come for 3 years later. And nearly every Sunday, many of the kids used to go up to Keoltown House, and they were up and down the stairs, all through the bedrooms, down in the cellar, and out in the outbuildings. And of course, the big boys, again, the likes of Michael Garvin and my brother Tom, they used to climb out onto the balcony of Keoltown House. And in those days, you could see all over Lettistown. And of course, nobody lived in Lettistown in those days because the Lettistowns didn't come for another 3 years. But clearly, you could see Lettistown House, which is another fabulous house in its day. And I'd like to welcome everybody here from Lettistown, by the way. And of course, 50 years ago, there were very few iPhones. And of course, in fact, there was no telephone at all in Keoltown. There wasn't even a television. And we used to go down to the Ras Daltons to watch television. And we used to go down there to see Laurel and Hardy, the Three Stooges. Haven't seen them in years. Well, Robin Swain was telling me that here tonight to get the smell of drink. But I remember one time now, and true story by the way, my brother Jimmy was sent down for a loaf at the Butchers, and he was down in the Ras Daltons watching television with Joe Hershey, and my brother John. And this is a true story. And on the way home, just about where Joe Kerrigan's and Trish's house is, right in the middle of the road, there was this brown ball, and it was glowing light. This is a true story. And I'd never seen that like this before. And actually, they were afraid of it. And they were so afraid of it that they went around it to get by it. And Joe says to John, "Don't go near that now, John. That could be a bomb." And they went into the first house, which was Tierney's house, now Joe Coppola's. And as soon as Mrs. Tierney heard what they had to say, she went to the press, and she took out the holy water, and she blessed the three of them. And my brother Jimmy, he was so traumatized with what he'd seen on the road, that the loaf that he had for the lunches, he left it behind him in Tierney's. And when the three lads arrived home, my mother says to Jimmy, "Where's the loaf of lunches?" He didn't know. He lost his loaf. So anyways, they didn't tell my dad what they saw on the road. And my dad said, "Was there any wire attached to it?" No, says Joe, there was no wires at all. He said, "It was a perfect round ball, and I'd never seen anything like it before." And my dad said, "Was it moving?" No, says Joe, it wasn't moving at all. He said, "It was just like the moon was left right in the middle of the road." Anyways, my dad says, "Well, I don't know what it is. It could be gone in the morning, and I'd never see it again." But anyways, the next day, all was revealed. And this is a true story. And a very young Eamon Duffy and a very young Jim Duffy, and the Lord have mercy on him, I know he'd love to be here tonight, hadn't they gotten a turnip, they peeled off the skin of the outside, and they carved out the inside, and they placed the candle in it, and they left it on the road, and it was actually planted for the girls, for the lads that found it. And while these three lads thought this was a bomb in the middle of the road, Eamon and Jim were on the other side of the hedge, laughing their heads off at these three guys there was a bomb on the road. Now, another story I remember was the time the girls went to the pictures. Now, I mightn't have all the facts right, but you know what I say. Never let the facts interfere with a good story. So, now the girls, and I hope I have it right here, was my sister Nora, Anne Hershey, Julia Hershey, and Mary Duffy, and I think Kathleen Garvin was the only girl that had a bike on her light, or light on her bike. And anyway, so they went to the pictures, and on the way home they were stopped by the men in black, and of course they were fined 10 shillings. Of course, as soon as the father heard about it, he says, "Oh, couldn't take your eye off for 1 minute." He was telling this to Eddie Duffy. And then he says, "Oh, my own little sick." He says, "They're gone every night of the week." Oh, he says, "I don't know where they are." He says, "They're gone with them gang down the road there." She says, they never leave the road." So anyway, says my dad, he says, "What about this? 10 shillings, fine." And Eddie says, "Oh, you'll have to pay that." He says, there's no point in arguing with the law. So anyways, my dad and Eddie, they paid the fine. And of course, Christy, now the first thing you have to remember about Christy Hershey, he was a great storyteller. He was a natural storyteller. And the next week, my dad and Christy, they cycled in to the court. And Christy went in and he says, "Your Honour, I want you to know this is the first summons that ever came into our house." And he says, "I've served in the war in independence, and I've got an IRA medal to prove it. And if you don't believe me, the record is below in the barracks in Westport." "Oh, very well," said the judge, "but he says your daughters were out and they didn't have a light on their bike." And Christy says, "Oh," he says, "I know they were out." He says, "As soon as I heard they were out," he says, "I went around to all the houses in the village and I gathered up all the lights I could find." And he says, "I set off on my bike out to meet them." Now he says, along the way, he says, "I got a puncture." And I had to go home again, he says, and fix the puncture. And he says, by the time I had the puncture fixed, and I was just setting off to meet them again, when all the girls arrived home. And I can tell you this, Your Honour, he says, I gave them an awful telling off for being out such a night without a light in their bike. So anyways, to make a long story short, the judge says, well, in light of the facts you've outlined here today, and giving your service to the country, we let your girls off this time under the Probation Act. So anyways, on the way home, my dad and Christy, they went into John Bag for a stout, because that's what they always did in those days. And my dad says to Christy, he says, you know, he says, Christy, you shouldn't be at the farmland at all. He said, in the Dáil you should be, because you talk your way out of any situation. And Christy says, oh, he says, I'd never be a politician, he says. I'd rather work for a living. Another story I remember, now Christy was a great storyteller, and he used to tell these stories to John Garvin and Eddie Duffy and my dad. Now another story he used to tell was about his best friend, Peter O'Malley. And Peter, he says to my dad, he says, you know what, baby, he says, Chester as we used to call him. And he says, you know, Chester has applied for the blind pension. But he says, I don't know why he's actually applied for it, because he can actually see better than myself. So anyways, this man came out from the Department of Social Welfare, and he was asking Chester all these questions, and the man was writing it down in a notebook. And he went over to the yard, and he picked up this silver basin, about 2 feet in diameter. And he held it up like that. And he said, Mr. O'Malley, he says, can you see what this is? And Chester says, if it's not a half a crown, it's a 2 shilling piece. Now, another one I remember was, Christy was always talking about going back to Westport because he missed the salmon fishing, and he used to play in the band because he used to play the bagpipes.